This video contains images of graphic violence and warfare. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi Gusio, Hafade, and Aloha mai kako. Welcome to today's side event titled Demilitarizing the Pacific, Ryukyu, Okinawa, the Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, and Hawaii. This event is for the United Nations Human Rights Council 46th session from 22 February through 23 March in the year 2021. It is under the auspices of Incomendios, a non-governmental organization in consultative status with the Economic and Security Council of the United Nations. This event is also co-sponsored by the Kiwani Foundation and the Peace for Okinawa Coalition. We would additionally like to thank Our Commonwealth 670 and the Ryukyu Independence Action Network for your support and cooperation. My name is Robert Kajiwara, founder and president of the Peace for Okinawa Coalition, a non-profit organization led by Millennial Ryukyuans in order to promote Ryukyuan culture, history, language, and issues. My petition to stop the illegal construction of the new military base at Henoko, Okinawa has over 212,000 signatures on it. Ryukyuans have been working closely with native Hawaiians as well as with Chamorro, the native peoples of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands, to help each other in our shared goals. For generations, our island nations have been under U.S. military occupation, denying us of our democratic right to self-determination and causing numerous human rights violations that threaten our lives and livelihood. The U.S. military often transfers troops between these island nations to the detriment of the native and local peoples. Now, Ryukyuans, Hawaiians, and Chamorro have come together to jointly oppose the U.S. military buildup and occupation of our islands. All of the speakers in this event are indigenous to the Pacific. I am native Ryukyuan, also known as Okinawan or Uchinanchu. Next, we have Professor Hoshin Nakamura, who is also native Ryukyuan. We have Representative Sheila Babauta, who is Chamorro of the Northern Mariana Islands. Then we have H.E. Leon Kalahau-Siu and Madam Ruth Bolme, both of whom are native Hawaiian. We ask that the United Nations and the international community at large hear the voices of the indigenous peoples of the Pacific who have long suffered under U.S. military occupation. First, we turn our attention to the Ryukyu Islands, also known as Okinawa or Uchina. Ryukyuans are the indigenous peoples of Ryukyu as recognized by UNESCO and many other human rights organizations and scholars. Based on archaeological evidence, scholars believe that Ryukyuans have inhabited the Ryukyu Islands for at least 32,000 years. Geneticists have pointed out that Ryukyuans are genetically closer to the Ainu, the indigenous peoples of Japan, than to modern Japanese people. Anthropologists have pointed out cultural and social similarities between Ryukyuans and indigenous peoples in Taiwan, as well as in Southeast Asia. For centuries, Ryukyu prospered as a center of trade, diplomacy, and cross-cultural exchange, and maintained close, friendly relations with China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Ryukyu and China had a particularly close, important, and mutually beneficial relationship, and Ryukyu often acted as mediator between China and other nations. In 1609, the Satsuma clan of Japan invaded Ryukyu, forcing Ryukyuans to pay tribute, though Ryukyu maintained its sovereignty. During the 19th century, Ryukyu became recognized by the Western nations as an independent country under international law, with the signing of treaties with the United States, France, and the Netherlands. In 1879, Ryukyu became Japan's first colonial conquest when it invaded and illegally annexed Ryukyu against the will of the Ryukyuan people, throwing Ryukyuans into poverty and forcefully changing the name of Ryukyu to Okinawa in an attempt to erase Ryukyu's history as an independent country. During World War II, Japan placed an inordinate amount of military presence on Okinawa Island, the largest island of Ryukyu, with the deliberate intent to sacrifice native Okinawans in order to protect the Japanese homeland. This resulted in the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, which killed around 200,000 people, including 1/4 to 1/3 of the indigenous Okinawan population. After the war, Japan's other colonial territories regained their independence, except for Ryukyu, because the United States military decided to keep Ryukyu for itself to use for bases. From 1945 to 1972, Ryukyuans lived under direct rule by the U.S. military and had no form of democracy or self-rule. There were numerous problems with this arrangement, and Ryukyuans strongly resisted military rule. Thus, in 1972, the U.S. gave Ryukyu to Japan without any type of vote or plebiscite from Ryukyuans. Ryukyuans demanded a return of independence, though both the U.S. and Japan ignored this. Since 1972 up to the present day, Ryukyu remains under de facto joint occupation by both the U.S. and Japan. Under this arrangement, the local Okinawa prefectural government is nothing but a figurehead and is powerless to promote or protect the rights of the Okinawan people, since both the U.S. and Japan regularly violate and overrule the Okinawa prefectural government. Since 1972, the amount of military presence on Okinawa Island has increased substantially. Although Okinawa comprises less than 1% of Japan's land area, it contains over 70% of Japan's military presence. The military causes numerous problems for Ryukyuans, including economic deprivation, crime, military accidents, noise pollution, and environmental contamination, including the poisoning of Okinawa's supply of drinking water with cancer-causing agents. The military takes up around 15% of Okinawa's land area and around 30% of the arable land, yet contributes just 5% to Okinawa's economy, running at a severe deficit and creating a huge economic burden on the Okinawan people. Currently, the US and Japan are building another military base on Okinawa at a location called Henoko, which contains a coral reef filled with hundreds of rare and endangered species, such as the Okinawa dugong. The Ryukyuan people strongly oppose this base. My petition demanding an immediate stop to the base's construction has over 212,000 signatures on it, though both the US and Japan have completely ignored this. On 24 February 2019, a referendum was held in which the people of Okinawa overwhelmingly voted against this base. However, the US and Japan have ignored this as well. Thus, we are asking that the United Nations and the international community at large please respond to the Okinawan people and protect our rights from US and Japanese militarism. For more on this, we turn to Hoshin Nakamura, Professor Emeritus of Okinawa University. He is native Ryukyuan and survived the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, in which at least 1 out of every 4 Okinawans were killed. Professor Nakamura has degrees in Asian Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and Seton Hall University. He taught history at Okinawa University for over 20 years and has also taught at University of Maryland and University of the Ryukyus. Professor Nakamura has been involved in the Ryukyu independence movement for over 5 decades. He last spoke at the UN Human Rights Council in 2019. Professor Nakamura, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
I'm an indigenous Ryukyuan, Hoshin Nakamura. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to report on remilitarization issue and the Ryukyu Hawaii independence of the stolen kingdoms of the Ryukyus and Hawaii, that is located in Western Pacific and the middle of the Pacific, respectively. This is a map of the Ryukyu Islands. The people of Ryukyu Kingdom maintained very peaceful and friendly relationship with China, Korea, and Southeast Asian nations, as well as Japan, from the 12th century to the early 17th century. However, people of Ryukyu Kingdom encountered the series of disasters brought by the outside invaders in 1609, 1879, and 1945, respectively. The indigenous Ryukyuans have suffered from undemocratic and inhumane control of the outside powers. The power to self-determination and human rights have been taken away from the indigenous people. In 1879, Japan hijacked Ryukyu Kingdom. King Shotai and his family, his government officials, were kidnapped to Japan in spite of their strong opposition and resistance. Japan established military bases in the Ryukyus to fight the Pacific War in World War II. In 1945, the bloody Battle of Okinawa was fought between Japan and the United States with its allied powers. In 3 months battle, about 240,000 lives were lost, but more than half of them, about 123,000 Ryukyuan people, died in the battle. After the total defeat of Japan, the U.S. military forces should have allowed the Ryukyuan people to become independent, just like the neighboring nations restored independence. Instead, the U.S. forces stayed and confiscated the large area of the islands and constructed huge military bases in the Ryukyus. The indigenous Ryukyuans lost their large, rich farmland and fishing zones. Poverty and starvation prevailed all over the islands. Many islands women were raped and murdered by the U.S. soldiers. The U.S. military base generated accidents and incidents threatened the daily lives of the island people. Drinking water and soil have been contaminated by toxic chemicals like PFOS, P4, defluent, etc. Furthermore, the Ryukyuan people have been suffering from noise damage caused by roaring sounds of the flying jet planes over their houses, schools, very early in the morning and very late at night. All these are not allowed in the United States, but both the US and Japan says it's okay in the Ryukyus under the US-Japan State Security Treaty and Status of Forces Agreement, known as SOFA. The Ryukyuan people have suffered too much and too long under the foreign control. The human rights of the indigenous Ryukyuans have been violated. Now is the time for the oppressed Ryukyuans to become free from the outside powers. In order to become free and restore the power to self-determination, both the USA and Japan must return their political power back to their owners, the Ryukyuan people, immediately. We, the people of Peace for Okinawa Coalition, strongly demand the immediate reversion of the stolen Ryukyu Islands back to the inhabitants of the Ryukyu Islands. When many colonized nations became independent after World War II, like India, China, Korea, Philippines, and other Southeast Asian nations, they were economically not independent. However, most nations became independent after 1945, when Second World War was over. And they restored their economy by using the power to self-determination. That is very important. When Japan became independent in 1952, Japan's economy was very weak. Many people were living in poverty, and I saw many beggars everywhere. At that time, Japan became independent. But Japan regained the power to self-determination. By using this power, Japan became rich, affluent, industrialized. So, independence doesn't come from economy first. It comes from political. Political power is very important. The power to self-determination comes from independence. By using this power to self-determination, many nations, not only Japan, India, Korea, China, and other countries, gradually industrialized, developed, and became self-supportive nation. Ryukyu Kingdom was independent before Japanese invasion took place, and Ryukyuan people were enjoying affluent, prosperous, peaceful, and longevity. But this was lost because of foreign control. Power to self-determination was taken away with independence gone. Since then, our ancestors have long suffered until today. We don't want our future generations live under the slave-like subservient people under the foreign control like today. Look at Henoko. The new military base construction is going on by destroying beautiful Oura Bay in this moment, in spite of the fact that more than 70% of the island people voted not to build the new military base. We have enough, more than enough, too much military installation, too many. Before reversion 1972, Ryukyu had less than 10% of US military bases in Japan. But immediately after reversion 1972, all the US Marine bases and forces were transferred to Okinawa. Today, after reversion, US military bases and forces in Okinawa counts for more than 70% of US military installations in Japan, which Okinawa is only 0.6% in total land area. So the governor, Denny Tamaki, is claiming US military bases in Okinawa should be reduced to less than 50% in the first step, and gradually get rid of all the military bases. So that is the situation of Okinawa. More than 25 independent nations without established military forces, but no country is invading them, because today international world is operated under the world universal international law. So we are not living in the country like a pre-war. We are living in a democratic, law-abiding, peaceful world today under the United Nations. So when Okinawa becomes independent again, we become free from US-Japan Security Treaty and the Status and Forces Agreement, which means both United States and Japanese military forces must leave Okinawa automatically, and we become a military-free, peaceful nation, democratic nation, prosperous, happy, enjoying longevity, which we can share with the rest of the world. Thank you for listening.